Good evening. This is the meeting of September 22nd, 2014, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started tonight, you might have noticed a different look for our agendas. We are using a new, improved program, but one of the sort of hiccups in getting started is sometimes things get dropped off. So we will have comments from the public this evening. It's just not written on the agenda, but we'll do that after the proclamations tonight. And the first order of business this evening is something very exciting. We're going to be swearing in two new police officers to our force, and I'm going to turn it over to Chief Setter to introduce them.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and members of council, I'm honored to be before you tonight on this historic occasion. We are here to swear in the first two officers hired by the Consolidated Princeton Police Department. I've always believed that one of the most important responsibilities of an organization's leadership is to form a clear vision for the organization's future and prepare that organization to effectively meet future challenges. Our two newest officers are an integral part of our department's vision. They have both illustrated the characteristics that we want represented in all of our officers. They are both intelligent, they're kind, they're respectful, and they're very ethically strong people. This was illustrated by their superb performance in all stages of our recruitment and hiring process. They each bring a skill set and background that complement each other, and they will both greatly benefit our department. A brief introduction of our two newest officers. Officer Don Matthews was raised in Bordentown and attended Bordentown High School, where he excelled academically. He attended Richard Stockton State College, where he again achieved academic excellence and graduated with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Don formerly served with the Mansfield Township Police Department, where he attained the rank of sergeant in under 4 years. I'm confident that Officer Matthews will be a tremendous addition to our department. Officer Deshaun Cribb was raised in Trenton and attended Trenton High School, where he was a member of the National Honor Society and captain of his high school football team. Deshaun went on to Montclair State University, where he obtained a bachelor's degree in sociology and justice studies. Deshaun brings with him a strong sense of community and a love of mentoring young people, which will be a strong asset in his work with our department. I want to end by saying I wish both officers a long and happy, healthy, and safe career with our department, and I am honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside both of you. Best of luck.
So Deshaun, Cribb, want to come up? Oh, Don first. Oops. Sorry. We're going to do Don first. That's the order, Ron. I'm Don Matthews. And is someone going to hold the Bible for you? Want to invite up your family? Hold that. Hold the book. Okay. Please place your hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. I, Donald Matthews.
I, Donald Matthews.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of New Jersey.
And the Constitution of the State of New Jersey.
And that I will bear true faith and allegiance.
And I will bear true faith and allegiance.
To the same.
To the same.
And to the governments established in the United States.
To the governments established established in the United States
and in this state under the authority of the people.
and in this state under the authority of the people.
I do further solemnly swear
I do further solemnly swear
that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly
that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly
perform all the duties
perform all the duties
of probationary patrol officer
of probationary patrol officer
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, now we're ready for you, Deshaun. Go, hi. Raise your right hand. I, Deshaun Cribb,
I, Deshaun Cribb,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
that I will bear truth, allegiance, and the truth of the same,
and to the governments established in the United States
and to the governments established in the United States
and in this state
and in the state
under the authority of the people.
and the authority of the people.
I do further solemnly swear
I do further solemnly swear
that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly
that I will faithfully, partially, and justly,
perform all the duties of probationary patrol officer.
that I will, repeat that, I'm sorry,
Perform all the duties
perform all the duties
of probationary patrol officer
of probational officer
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. Start. Okay. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah. Yep. Okay, we have two proclamations for this evening. The first one is a proclamation declaring October 8th, 2014 as International Walk to School Day and Crossing Guard Appreciation Day. Whereas now that school is in session, more children are walking to and from neighborhood schools, many of them during the busiest time of the day. And whereas it is vital that the safety of our children be addressed by making walking safer in our community, and whereas parents, caregivers, and crossing guards play an important role by teaching children about pedestrian and bicycling safety, and whereas children, parents, and community leaders around the world are joining together to walk to school and evaluate walking and bicycling conditions in their communities, and whereas the New Jersey State Legislature is considering the designation of International Walk to School Day, generally the second Wednesday in October, as Crossing Guard Appreciation Day. Now, therefore, I, Liz Lempert, Mayor of the Municipality of Princeton, County of Mercer, State of New Jersey, do hereby proclaim October 8th, 2014 as International Walk to School Day and Crossing Guard Appreciation Day in Princeton, New Jersey, and urge all students, parents, teachers, administrators, schools, and school districts in Princeton to express their appreciation to our local crossing guards, to participate in walking and biking events, and to consider the safety and health of pedestrians and bicyclists this day and every day. And we have a second proclamation putting the brakes on Fatality Day. which I apologize as we... You have, thank you. There's only one person can get internet access at a time up here. All right. All right. Put the brakes on fatality days. October 10th, 2014 has been declared Put the Brakes on Fatalities Day in Princeton, New Jersey. Whereas across the nation, traffic crashes cause approximately 34,000 fatalities in 2012 and are the leading cause of death for young people ages 15 to 34. And whereas in New Jersey, 542 individuals lost their lives in traffic crashes in 2013. And whereas alcohol-related crashes accounted for 22.5% of the state's traffic fatalities, while 26% of all fatal crashes involved traveling at unsafe speeds. And whereas safer driving behaviors such as buckling up, every ride, obeying posted speed limits, stopping for pedestrians in crosswalks, and using crosswalks when walking, avoiding aggressive driving behaviors, never driving impaired, wearing proper safety gear while riding a motorcycle or bicycle, and focusing solely on driving by avoiding distractions can dramatically reduce the number of traffic-related injuries and deaths. Now, therefore, I, Liz Lempert, Mayor of the Municipality of Princeton, New Jersey, do hereby proclaim October 10th, 2014, Put the Brakes on Fatalities Day, and call upon everyone to put these life-saving behaviors into practice to improve safety on roadways in our community and throughout the state. Thank you. Okay, and now we will have comments from the public. There was a sign-up sheet on the podium, so we'll start with the folks that had signed up before the meeting. And this is if you want to comment on something that's not already on the agenda, I welcome you up. So Daniel Harris, number 1. And we do have a full house tonight, so if you could keep your remarks to 3 minutes, thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of council, Daniel Harris, 28 Dodds Lane. We are meeting one day after the Worldwide People's Climate Change March, and a day before the United Nations Conference on Climate Change. Yesterday's New York Times announced that the Rockefeller Foundation will divest itself of all holdings in fossil fuels. The same edition announced that greenhouse gas emissions rose 2.3% in 2013, with the world, quote, far off track in its efforts to control global warming. Princeton has a civic and universally communal responsibility to adopt best environmental practices as fully as possible, from thermostat adjustment to the use of 100% recycled paper with soy ink. Princeton also has an obligation to reduce its dependence on fossil fuels in every area of operations. With such a reduction in mind, I want to jump forward to the future PC meeting on October 13th, when it is likely that PC will discuss the excellent memorandum concerning the leaf and brush ordinance submitted to you by PEC, the Environmental Commission, on August 22nd. My aim, lest you be misled, is not to offer views on the leaf brush program itself. I mean instead to state simply that the document is incomplete. To the best of my knowledge, it was submitted without any financial information concerning the costs of the current leaf and brush program in Princeton. Without that information, no intelligent evaluations can be made concerning the civic value of the program in relation to other civic and municipal needs. Just 4 hours ago, I received from Councilwoman Krumiller a document, Leaves and Brush Numbers, Working Draft, which she compiled with Bob Huff and Janet Pellicero, and Bob gave you an oral presentation of this information on July 28th. Valuable as this document is, it makes no reference to gasoline used in the current leaf and brush program. I now request PC to ask municipal staff for their best estimates for gasoline consumed in the program as the trucks drive around Princeton streets and then transport leaf and brush to either Lawrenceville or Cranberry. This estimate should include number of gallons, mileage, total cost of gas for each segment of the program. In that way, we'll be able to evaluate the carbon footprint of our leaf and brush program. And if the information cannot be gotten for past years, then I now request that the information be gathered on a go-forward basis from fall 2014 onwards. Without an understanding of gas usages and expenditures, PC cannot make intelligent public policy. Most of you have substantial business experience. You would not make decisions without adequate information about either finances or resources. The PEC report, Section B, rightly recommends a public education program to help citizens understand their their options, ways indeed of behaving in a more environmentally sustainable manner. Princeton Council cannot properly construct or implement such a public education program without information pertaining to gas consumption. And without this understanding, none of us can understand the extent of our obligation to reduce our municipal carbon footprint and our present contributions, so to speak, to climate change, global warming, and the misuse of fossil fuels. It is my hope that a head start can be made on compiling these figures before the discussion on October 13th, 2014. And thank you very, very much in advance for all of your cooperation.
Thank you. We can certainly take that back to Public Works as well. So thank you. Wendy Mager?
Yes, good evening. Wendy Mager, 459 Cherry Hill Road. I wanted to speak tonight to alert those of you who aren't already aware of it to a newly proposed natural gas pipeline project called the Penn East Pipeline. This project is one of 7 that are currently proposed for the Delaware River Basin, including the Williams Transco Lady Southeast expansion that is already affecting Princeton. Unfortunately, we in New Jersey are located directly between the natural gas fracking operations in Pennsylvania and the coastal facilities from which large energy companies want to sell this flood of gas overseas, as well as distribution points for other parts of the U.S. 11 pipeline projects have already been constructed through the Delaware Basin since 2011. This latest proposal would cross, among others, Delaware, West Amwell, and Hopewell townships, and would pass quite near to Pennington Borough. It appears to have been cynically targeted to run through numerous farms and parks that were preserved by government and nonprofits with a great deal of thought, effort, and New Jersey taxpayer dollars. In Delaware Township, it would cut right through New Jersey Conservation Foundation's Wickechokie Creek Preserve. In Hopewell Township, it would run through 2 large sections of Mercer Meadows Park, where Mercer County only recently finished a major project to create trails, interpretive exhibits, and other enhancements. Ironically, one of these sections is the ecological district through which the Stony Brook flows and where access is limited to minimize human impact. Imagine the impact of cutting a 50 to 100 foot path through the woods and excavating for a pipeline. I don't think we can afford to look at this project and say, well, at least it's not in our town. It may not be this time, but Princeton happens to have both a considerable amount of preserved land and a number of pipeline branches already running through this community that companies may want to expand or connect to. We will also be inevitably affected by the degradation of Stony Brook and other natural resources near us. Moreover, I believe you would agree that we don't want to live in a county or a state that has become a spider web of natural gas pipelines with all the attendant pollution, environmental damage, and safety concerns that implies. That is why we need to stand with our fellow towns and our county to fight this pipeline and see that it never gets built. I urge the mayor and council to send a letter or resolution to the county executive, to our state legislative representatives, to Senators Menendez and I'm blanking, Booker and Representative Holt, and to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, expressing strong opposition to this project that has targeted our preserved parks and farms. I would also like to note for everyone present that the Delaware Riverkeeper is one of the lead organizations working to stop the Penneased pipeline, and you can find more information about it at www.delawareriverkeeper.org. Thank you for your consideration, and I do have some maps that show the trajectory of this proposed pipeline that I'd like to hand up.
Okay, thank you. And Wendy, I'll be in touch. We could probably get something on the next agenda, too. Thank you. John Marshall.
Jack, you stand? Good evening. John Marshall, President of the Princeton Merchants Association, and with me is Steve Carney of McCaffrey's Market. I put together a couple lines I just want to read out to everyone. Each and every day, countless unnamed individual volunteers put their careers on hold and their lives in dangers to help others in times of need. It stands to reason that those among us who have given of themselves for the benefit of others are in fact local heroes. This year, PMA has embraced the creation of an annual event that recognizes, thanks, and supports these unsung heroes volunteering and operating every day within our own community. And this is taking effect. McCaffrey's is sponsoring an event on the 17th of October. It's going to be under the big 7,000 square feet?
Yeah, roughly, I guess.
7,000 square feet tent in the courtyard of the shopping center. Friday night from 6 to 9 p.m., there is a cocktail party entirely put on by McCaffrey's. Tickets are $50 a piece, and the fund in its entirety is going to go to the fire department and shared with PFARS, the rescue outfit. Also, Steve wants to say about Saturday and Sunday's events.
Not only will we have the cocktail party, which will benefit the firemen and the EMTs, but Saturday and Sunday is actually the food show itself. And those tickets are $5 a piece. Last year we had roughly 2,000 people come through the food show. 100% of those ticket sales also will go to the EMTs and the firemen. So we really are looking for a great turnout, a lot of support. And the kids will be 12 and under are free. And the firemen and the EMTs will be there the entire weekend with their equipment for the kids. And it should be a great event. We're going to have close to 100 specialty food vendors demoing their product from 11 to 5, Saturday and Sunday. If you have never been to that food show, it's a great experience. And it's really become a Princeton experience. So that's why we've decided that all the ticket proceeds, 100%, will be donated to the charity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being such great community partners. It's really wonderful. Henry Singer.
Good evening, Henry Singer, 187 Laurel Circle. The recent launch of the Access Princeton initiative has created an opportunity to take resident engagement in municipal government to the next level. I am very pleased with the early results there are a wide variety of non-emergency issues being reported by residents and routed, actioned, and resolved by the government. I am guessing that some members of the municipal government are energized by the level of resident engagement, and others, human nature being what it is, are less enthusiastic or resistant of the change. In coming weeks, Mayor and Council will be making one of the most important decisions that you will be making for several years to come. A decision that will greatly influence the cost and quality of the services provided to the community by the government. As we go forward to hire a new town administrator, I sincerely hope that the candidate that you select, in addition to having the requisite administrative knowledge, skills, and experience, that they will champion and lead the town forward in the areas of openness, transparency, and resident engagement in municipal government. Good luck to you as you make this very difficult and very important decision. Thank you.
Thank you. And that ends the pre-sign-up list, but if, yeah, you're still welcome to come if you haven't signed up already.
Good evening. Linda Auerbach, Lytle Street. In the month of April and May, I believe it was, twice, I implored someone, and I believe Mayor Lambert, you said you would refer it to the Traffic Safety Committee. The issue of the signage on Lytle Street needs to be addressed. When one approaches Lytle Street from Witherspoon, it's a one-way street running from Witherspoon to John, the signage that indicates that there, for example, no parking from here to corner, is completely faded. It's just white. So we have people parking very close to the pedestrian crosswalk, which is dangerous, because the people coming down the street the wrong way on a one-way street, because the signage at John Street and Witherspoon is completely inadequate, are speeding down from John Street to Witherspoon Street and not seeing the pedestrians at the Witherspoon Street side of this one-way street, who are stepping off the curb from the north side because there are cars parked almost on top of the pedestrian crosswalk. In addition, at the John Street side of Lytle, there are people parked, in fact, some days in the pedestrian crosswalk, say 2 to 3 inches. There is no signage indicating that they should be back about 10 or 15 feet, so there's high visibility of pedestrians, especially children in that area, stepping into that crosswalk.
Thank you. Yes, so I understand
if something can be done.
I understand from Councilwoman Butler that Sergeant Murray, our traffic sergeant, this is on his top of his list and he's looking into it right now, so hopefully it'll be corrected soon. But yeah, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Is that right? Mayor Floyd?
Thank you very much, Mayor. Excuse my slowness, but age and ailments have crossed. Jim Floyd, 64 Harris Road, Princeton. This is a moment, if you'll allow me, that I request council to think about a future resolution commemorating the contribution of 2 men in this community who were icons and progenitors of open occupancy and affordable housing in Princeton. I moved to Princeton in 1946, and it was bereft with segregation, discrimination. These men, with their hearts, minds, and work, augmented by an occasional dollar or two, did much to break down the curse of segregation and denial in our community. I ask you to recognize these 2 men, Len Newton and Ted Vile, for the work they've done in the area of community relations, more specifically, making us one family. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on an item not on the agenda? Yeah, please come to the microphone.
Hello, I'm Al Cavallo, 289 Western Way, Princeton. I had actually a letter to the editor in the Town Topics and Princeton Packet on the ordinance on the agenda tonight on fracking, and I sent copies to all of you. So.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So when we get to fracking.
Right. I just want to make a comment.
Okay.
Okay. Just reiterate what I said in the letter, that I think it's great to have ordinances like this, but I really like to emphasize that it's important for the town and the people in the town to try to reduce their own consumption of natural gas as much as possible. I don't think people realize that most of the natural gas we burn comes from fracking. That didn't used to be the case. It is the case now. So it's really incumbent on all of us to take action to reduce our own consumption of natural gas. There are ways to do this that are technically and economically affordable. They cost you a little bit more money, but it's perfectly affordable. I can assure you I've tried it. So, and I'd also specifically like the council to look into buying renewable electricity, as I mentioned in the letter. It's also a bit more expensive, but it gets you out of natural gas burning for electricity. And also, I'd like to ask the council to look into making a list of buildings that the township owns that you might convert from natural gas heating to heat pumps. This would actually send a real message, a very strong message, I think, that we take climate change very seriously and are willing to do something about it. Thanks.
Thank you. And is there anybody else who'd like to comment on something that's not already on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to presentations. We do have two presentations I want to make sure we get to tonight, but I did want to get a show of hands of people who are here for other items, so we can maybe get to those a little earlier. How many people are here for the fracking ordinance? Okay. And how many people are here for the Poe Road sidewalks? Anybody? No? Okay. And Witherspoon Street? Okay. We're going to do the Princeton Ridge Stewardship Plan first, so because I think that, okay, good, thank you, Dana. But I think that'll probably take less time, and then because I know there's probably going to be a lot of comment for the Witherspoon Street discussion. So with that, I'd like to invite up Dr. Michael Van Clough, who worked on the Princeton Ridge East Conservation Stewardship Plan for us. And while you're getting set up, just by way of introduction, this is a collaborative effort by the municipality and many of the partners that we've collaborated with on land acquisition projects. So Friends of Princeton Open Space, Mercer County, DNR Greenway, Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association, New Jersey Conservation Foundation. And this is really, oh, there we go. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks for having me. It is a very long document, but I think I will summarize it for everyone here and try to leave a little bit of room for questions. So I'll try not to take more than 10 minutes, so there's at least 5 minutes for questions if anyone has any. So this plan, the partners are, I don't know if I could do that. Oh, I'm sorry. Better? Okay. The partners are listed there on the title page of the report. Mercer County, Princeton, DNR Greenway, who did a great job of organizing things along the way. Friends of Princeton Open Space, New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. And this report was completed earlier this year. Okay, so the main purposes of the stewardship plan are three. clearly state the visions and goals, and the vision statement is to provide model stewardship and biodiversity along with excellent public recreation and educational opportunities. I'll get to the goals a little bit further on. And the plan also defines the conservation values, threats to their health, and strategies and actions to mitigate identified threats. It's a very lockstep type of plan. And another aspect of the plan and why it's hundreds of pages with maps and such is that it's meant to be a source of reference material for the partnership and the public to steward the conservation area over time. Okay, so there's a map of the stewardship area, the conservation area. The black lines showing the preserved properties that were investigated during the making of the plan. And I'll highlight the sort of green band is, probably can't read that, it's the diabase bedrock that really makes the conservation area unique and adds a lot to its ecological value. And you can see on the table there's 590 acres that are protected within the conservation area, and the overall area is about 1,700 acres. So the ecological values, primarily it's mature forests, again, especially those growing on the diabase bedrock. And there are meadows, mostly opportunities for healthy meadows, but there's good potential meadow habitat within the conservation area. And there's obviously a lot of recreational value within the conservation area. There's already 8.5 miles of existing trails, and I'll show a map towards the, later on in the presentation. And there's a proposal for 3 additional miles to make a nice loop trail, so you can kind of really take a nice tour of the entire conservation area in one loop. The threats, as they are in most places in New Jersey, probably the Northeast as well, overabundant deer. Current density goals are 20 per square mile. Now, Princeton has done better than anyone else, quite frankly, in managing the deer population. And without going into every last little detail, the recovery is patchy. So in some places you see fantastic understory recovery, and in many places there isn't yet. And there's a legacy impact. If a system has sort of been beaten down for many, many decades, even though this program has been going on for quite a while, it could take a very long time to recover, or, as I'm suggesting, it might be that the density goal should be reduced from 20 to 10 deer per square mile. And that would probably hasten the recovery. The picture up there, I can't really point at particular things, but that is a very infested forest. Multiflora rose. Yes, I was crying for my mama when I was walking through there. It was very painful. And lots of forests in Princeton in the conservation area are infested with multiflora rose. That plant with the broader leaves right below the white box is a spice bush that's heavily browsed by deer. If the deer were not eating that spice bush, it would overtop the rose and minimize or ultimately kill it. So that's just one example of how the health of the conservation area can be improved with a further reduction in the deer population. Invasive species are another problem. There's a number of newly emerging invasive species. So these are guys that are new bad actors on the scene. They're not the Japanese barberry and the multiflora rose, as I mentioned. They're some of the newer ones. And there are some populations within the conservation area. There's plenty widespread ones, and another strategy with invasives is maintaining clean areas. So there are areas with much less invasive species cover, and one strategy is to maintain those as clean, as an efficient strategy. So stewardship, part of the title of the report, stewardship is mitigating human impacts on natural areas. So overabundant deer, that's our fault. Invasive species, go figure, is also our fault. So if we want to make amends, so to speak, with nature, you perform stewardship to try to correct those things that we've done. And stewardship is all about, since we've done so many things, stewardship is about picking your battles wisely. So you think about things you can do something about, overabundant deer invasives. And there's things that you can't really reverse, like habitat fragmentation and the profound impacts of past agricultural impacts on soil, where forests have a really hard time being healthy under any deer densities. So the key, and why I personally was attracted to this project, was the fact that there's a lot of partners baked into it right from the word go, which is fantastic, because it's really the only way we're going to get anywhere is if we cooperate, work together, synergy, all those other good words. That's really what's needed for stewardship to work. The goals, there's 6 goals. You know, you can sort of read them as they're fairly large font, but white-tailed deer, strategic invasive species, do restorations in forests and meadows, gather additional information through biological surveys and monitoring, creating an integrated trail system, and also creating an integrated public outreach program. Again, with so many partners on board, these should be attainable goals. So each of these goals has a particular recommendation associated with them. So it gets a little bit more specific than the broad goals. You know, there's, you know, for example, reducing the deer population from 20 to 10 deer per square mile. You know, I'll just pick out a couple other ones. Goal 3.3-3, restore meadow habitat on 15 acres. And these are specified in the plan. Where are these places? You know, they're all mapped out. 5-1, create a loop trail that traverses the entire conservation area. But you get the gist. There's a bunch of well-defined goals, goals and recommendations. And just giving you one example, another example, goal, eradicate selected emerging invasive species. So there's the table of all the emerging species I found while out there, out and about. And you can just go down that list real quickly and say, well, let's see, that linden viburnum has 60 populations. We're probably not going to get ahead of that anymore. But look at Japanese Aurelia. There's only 3 populations. So you go after the things you can accomplish. And these things are sort of spelled out even more clearly. And I just kind of want to guide you through kind of what level of detail is there in the plan. So you could look at, you know, this is a part of the implementation table, and it gets, you know, obviously more and more specific. So goal 2-1-F, yes, I'm a scientist and I have problems, yes, very detailed. 2-1-F, Japanese Aurelia, 3 locations. The Latin long is there in the report. Estimated cost is $25. Easily accomplished. Other things are more expensive. But going after the emerging invasive species is a really good idea. And then there's a summary by year over the 10-year implementation period. And, you know, every year there's particular goals that are aimed to be accomplished, what the level of effort would be, and what the cost would be. And this is the a map of the existing and proposed trail system by the partnership. So those things in orange are existing trails. All of the incredible system that Princeton has with the sidewalk trails and you know, bike trails and all that other stuff, that could all be incorporated into this. But there would be a need to create a couple of new access points for safety purposes mostly. But also just ease of entering the loop system. And that's all detailed. The blue, the dark blue, would be the loop trail, and some of that loop trail would require new trails to be made. For example, at PSOP number 1 in the upper right side, there would be a need for additional trail mileage to create that loop. So, you know, I think this would be pretty exciting. I'd love to live here and be able to access, you know, that much trail system just by walking to it. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And there are parking areas, too, for folks that aren't immediately adjacent to to access through existing parking areas. And if there's any questions, I could try to address them.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Ms. Butler?
I have a question. Bernie, do you know off the top of your head what we spend on the deer population, on our deer eradication every year?
Between roughly $70,000 and $90,000 per year.
And this, you're recommending an additional almost $100,000 a year?
$70,000 to $90,000 per year.
No, I believe I used the figure that was given to me, the estimate that was given to me, and that's part of this already. That's part of the figures that were up there. That cost is already in it.
Well, I'm sorry, so we spend, what did you say, 70 to 90?
Roughly 70 to 90. I don't recall the exact figure, but it's in that range.
And you're recommending about $1 million over a 10-year period, $900,000 over a...
Yeah, the majority of the cost is the deer management program, and then there's additional things.
Is what we're already spending.
Yeah.
You're not talking about additional money that needs to be spent.
No, I didn't go into. You have a great, contractor for deer management. I didn't make any. I leave that to them, so to speak. My suggestion was to reduce the density, to get better ecological recovery.
Okay.
Just comment that has been our goal for about the last 14 years, to reduce the density of their population.
Right.
And we've been somewhat successful, but the density still is in excess of 20 per square mile.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of, and I don't know every specific thing that was tried by any stretch of the imagination. But there might be need to open up areas or work with private landowners and things like that, because deer management is awfully tricky. But perhaps there's opportunities there, and I'm talking out of school, to be honest with you, because I don't know exactly what's been attempted or what's realistic or not on that front. But there generally are opportunities for improvement in any deer management program, and you're at the most difficult stage. Most deer management programs at the stage of trying to go from 80 to 40 deer per square mile. When you're going from 20 to 10, it gets quite difficult. But unfortunately, what the forest is telling is that that needs to happen. The amount of forest herbs is ridiculously low. There's still many areas that are impacted. Like I said, many areas have recovered beautifully, but there are many more acres that haven't really recovered yet. And that's not going to happen unless the population goes down again.
I think we all agree with you, and we are working and will continue to work to bring the deer density down, deer population density down. Getting to 10 is going to be quite a challenge.
I'm sure.
But I think this report gave us new incentive to do that. I know I learned a lot from the report. Well, just the relationship with deer and invasive species. I just didn't realize that was such a big factor.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I know there's a few people who want to comment on this tonight, but what's going to happen now is I would encourage council to accept the report, and then I think it needs to go to the rec board and the Public Works Committee to work out some more of the details. I want to keep them. Here, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. If you have a comment, but I do want to. There's a lot of people here for the next presentation, so I want to keep things moving along.
Yeah, my name is Steve Hiltner. I'm at 139 North Harrison Street, and I used to work for Friends of Princeton Open Space, and I'm a naturalist and do habitat restoration, and I want to put my full support behind this plan, and also point to the fact that this ridge area is where open space preservation began in Princeton because of Oswald and Elizabeth Veblen, who donated 95 acres that turned into Herrontown Woods. And I just want to say that the historical aspects of the farming that used to occur in this area and the tremendous legacies of the Veblen's are extremely important part of this ridge and really need to be included in any consideration of management of the area. So I do hope that that oversight will be corrected. And actually, I'm working with a group called the Friends of Herrington Woods, which has put 500 hours into opening the trails of Herrington Woods and Autumn Hill Reservation. And we look forward to working with the partners and hopefully be included as a partner in the future for management of this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, come on up. You have to go to the mic or you can't hear you. You have to go to the mic because for people on, it's getting recorded, so it has to get picked up.
While she's making her way up, I do want to thank Steve and his group of volunteers out there that have done so much for the work on the trails, because it is hard work and it does make for a really welcoming, useful experience out in the Herrington Woods. Thank you, Steve.
Yes, hi. My name is Donna Fasanella. I just had a question about how...
I don't know if, can you, yeah, you have to speak right into the mic, and if,
okay.
so we can get your name for the minutes.
Right. I just wondered what the method of eradicating the foliage, the invasive species, what route you would take. Is it chemical, or is it like blunt pulling out the weeds, or?
It would certainly depend on the species and the situation, but herbicides are generally recommended for controlling invasives.
Okay.
Mechanical methods just don't work for the most part.
Right. So you might apply Roundup then to the roots once you pull out
Roundup, or the active ingredient in glyphosate, is often used for controlling invasives.
Right. I know that when used carefully and following the directions, most commercial landscapers don't find any problem with it. I think that breastfeeding moms might find a problem with it, because now Roundup is being found in breast milk. That's an actual study that's been peer-reviewed. So I'm just wondering, are there other ways that you could go without using chemicals, or is that too labor-intensive? And I'm kind of surprised that nobody else had that question.
Well, some of it's detailed in the report with the different methods, but I think at this point, I mean, there's a lot of detail in this report, so the point of tonight was for council to get the presentation, and then there's going to be a lot of work on the implementation and how we implement it, and we do have a really busy agenda, so the point is well taken.
Thank you so much for your time. Just one more thing. Milkweed, I think, is it, that monarch butterflies eat and lay their eggs on? I think that's the only plant that they eat and lay their eggs on, or one of the very few, and so we're seeing a huge decline in their populations due to Roundup. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would encourage council to accept this report, and it is, I mean, this open space represents a huge investment by the town, and I think it's important that we do our job to be good stewards of it in an environmentally sensitive way, and also provide for public access. Yeah, Ms. Howard?
So do you need a motion for us to?
That'd be great.
I would move that we would accept this excellent report.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your work. Okay, our next presentation for this evening is on the Witherspoon Street corridor, and this is the first in what will likely be a series of community dialogues on the Witherspoon Street corridor. We've heard from many residents in the past about the need to be proactive in our planning, including being proactive in our planning for the Witherspoon Street corridor. And this outreach is the first step in this process. In the past, it was difficult to coordinate all the activities along Witherspoon Street as it formerly ran through 2 municipalities. And now as a unified town, we have the opportunity to review the entire corridor and create a unified vision. We did send out notices to all the property owners to invite them here tonight, but of course this is a street that impacts almost everybody in the community, and we hope everybody who's interested will participate in the discussion. The Witherspoon corridor is less than a mile long, but it includes 8 different zones. And for the purposes of tonight's discussion, the area we're going to be reviewing runs from Nassau Street to Valley Road. I've asked Lee Solo, our planner, to start with a brief presentation on the existing zoning that's there now. So we all start with the same understanding of what is permitted currently. Following the presentation, we can start a dialogue on the corridor and discuss next steps. If after hearing the presentation we decide the current zoning makes sense, we can decide to leave the zoning as it is. If we're concerned that the zoning may result in development that is not in keeping with the community's vision, then we will want to consider next steps. Some of the things we might want to consider include deciding on how to move forward. Do we want to have a community meeting? Do we want to form a task force or an advisory committee? Do we want to hire a consultant to guide us through the process? Do we want to focus first on creating a vision statement for the corridor? Do we want to ultimately revise the zoning to change uses, to increase or decrease the intensity of development allowed, or to create new design standards? Do we want to develop what's been talked about more recently, a new form-based code, which would focus on the form and structure of buildings and how they relate to the public realm or streetscape? So the goal of tonight's presentation and work session will be to start this conversation and to end with some agreement on how we want to move forward and to figure out what the next steps will be. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Lisa, our planner.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening. Hopefully, in a moment on the screen, you'll see the presentation. What I'm basically going to do is walk through the existing zoning, as the Mayor had indicated, from Nassau Street all the way down to Valley Road. On the left side of the room is a map on the wall which shows all the zoning. I'm just going to have a blow-up of that on the screen shortly. Okay. We're going to start at Nassau Street and work our way through. In red, this is the CB zone. It runs from Nassau Street to the left of the map as you're looking at it, to Paul Robeson, which is to the right, or to the north. So we're going to use Nassau Street as the starting point. This zone also is part of the Historic Preservation Central Zone, and that runs from Nassau Street to Hullfish Street, right about here, and to Spring Street on the east side. And you can see the small dots. They don't show up very well on the overhead, but on the other map it will. This area is approximately 900 feet in length. There are 28 properties located in the CB zone along Witherspoon Street. Parking is permitted on both sides of the street. It's regulated by meters. It has 30-minute and 2-hour parking restrictions. The lot sizes in this area, they vary, as do the height of the buildings in the area. The building heights vary from 3 to 5 stories, and uses included in the district are retail, restaurant, offices, personal service uses such as barbershops and beauty shops, public uses, and mixed use. And mixed use is a building that contains residential and non-residential uses within it, typically with apartments above offices or retail. The zone itself permits most of those uses. It allows the retails, the restaurant, offices, personal services, public uses, and mixed-use buildings. Just briefly, I'd like to let everybody know what some of the standards are. The lot area, as I had indicated, they vary in size, and the zoning understands that and varies the lot size based upon the type of use that is permitted. Front yard setback, which is the distance between the property line and the beginning of the building, it is either 0 or 10 feet. So in this zone, if you build, the buildings are either built right at the property line or set back 10 feet. Similarly, for the rear yard, it's 0 and 10. Side yards are either 0 or 12. This zone allows a floor area ratio of 1.5. And floor area ratio is the way we planners measure the intensity of the development in the area. So what you do is you take the lot area and multiply it by that ratio, the 1.5. That gives you how much building you can put on the lot. So that if you have one of the smaller lots in the zone, like a 3,000 square foot lot, you would be permitted to build 4,500 square feet. If you have one of the larger lots in the district, let's say 7,000 square feet, you could build 10,500 square feet on that lot. And then the size of the building would be depending on whether you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 stories. The height in this district is 60 feet or 5 stories, and the zone permits a 60% lot coverage, which means that you can have a building covering 60% of the lot, and then you would have parking on the remainder. Okay. Then the next zone, as we move towards the north, is the R4 zone. This runs from Paul Robeson Place to Quarry Street. It's approximately 500 feet in length. There are 8 properties, and this is, as you can see on the screen, the bright yellow. It's the lighter yellow on the wall on the left. There's no parking on the east side and 5-hour parking on the west. This zone is currently a mix of residential uses. Nonprofit uses also are permitted as conditional uses. The Arts Council is located in this zone, as are some places of worship. On the east side, where the R4 designation is the Princeton Cemetery. And as you can see from the map, the lot sizes vary a little bit in this size. In general, most of the properties are 2 and 3 stories. Obviously, the cemetery is just as open space. The zone permits single-family homes, 2-family homes, attached dwellings, your basic townhouses, and multiple dwellings, which would be apartment buildings. As a conditional use, places of worship and philanthropic uses and educational uses are also permitted. The bulk standards in this zone are for lot area, and they vary from 3,000 to 6,000 square feet, again, depending on whether it's a single-family home or an attached dwelling. The setbacks are similar to the downtown somewhat in that they're, rather than 0, they're either 15 to 25 feet, again, depending on whether it's single-family or an attached dwelling. Rear yard setback is 25 feet to 35 feet. Side yard is 8 feet minimum. The floor area ratio, or FAR, in this area is 40 to 45%. So again, using our 3,000 square foot, which is one of the smaller lots in this zone, you would have a 1,200 square foot house or multifamily dwelling. If it were a 6,000 square foot lot, which would be on the larger side, you would have a 2,400 square foot dwelling. The zone does permit up to 35 feet, which accommodates a 3-story building, and again, the lot coverage here is 40 to 45%. So you can see it's a little bit less intense than in the CB zone. I'm going to continue to move to the north now. This orange or burnt orange color is the RB zone, which is the residence business zone. This district runs from Quarry Street, again to the south, to just about Clay Street. The Henry Pennell Center is right here. The RB zone, again, this zone only fronts on Witherspoon Street. It's approximately 850 feet in length. There are about 32 properties here. There's no parking on the east side of Witherspoon Street, and there's metered parking on the west side. Currently, this area has a mix of uses. It has residential properties, both 1 and 2 family dwellings. There are some apartment buildings mixed into there. Offices and personal services are located in this zone. They're only permitted on the first floor. Restaurants, retail, and places of worship are also found in this zone. Not unlike the other zones, the lot size varies. I should point out, I'm going to keep repeating that the lot size varies. None of Witherspoon Street was developed over one period of time, and because of that, the lot sizes all varied. It's not like a typical subdivision one might find elsewhere in town where everybody has the same size lot. The RB zone permits single-family homes, two-family homes, attached homes, again, townhouses, and multiple dwellings, which would be an apartment building. Mixed uses are permitted in the RB zone. However, as I indicated, the business use must be on the ground floor, and it's limited to 40% of that total FAR that we were talking about before, being the total amount of building on the lot. Business uses that are permitted are offices, retail, restaurants, and personal services. The bulk standards here vary. In general, the front yard setback is between 15 to 25 feet, with a rear yard of 20 to 30 feet, a side yard of 10 to 20 feet. The FAR varies from 0.6 to 0.9. When you have a multifamily dwelling, it can go up to 0.9. Again, using that 3,000 square foot for the smaller lots, that would yield under the 0.6 about an 1,800 square foot building. If you had a larger lot at 6,000 square feet, it would yield approximately 5,400 square feet. So again, what we have is a series of regulations that begin to limit the development and control what's there. In general, most of the development we're going to see either complies or was grandfathered into the development itself. The next zone to talk about, as you can see, we're back on the west side, is an R4 with the bright yellow, but I want to talk a little bit about the R4A, which is located on the east side. It's a small zone in terms of its frontage on Witherspoon Street. It's 115 feet in length. It's one property. It's the Franklin and Maple Terrace homes that are located there. The R4 and the R4A have very similar standards. There are a couple of variations which I'd like to highlight so everybody understands. We've already covered the R4. But the R4A, first, the A is for affordable housing. There is a requirement if there's any redevelopment, it would have a 20% set aside. The R4A, you can't see it on the map, but as I indicated, it's Franklin and Maple Terrace, as well as what was the hospital's parking lot on Franklin Avenue. The other differences in the bulk standards are that in the R4 zone, where we have attached and multiple dwellings, you're limited to 3 units per structure. So if you have townhouse development, you can only have 3 townhouses that are attached, and then you would need a break, and then you could have another 3. Similarly, with a multiple dwelling or an apartment building, you could only have 3 units within the structure. In the R4A, we expanded that so that you could have 6 units in the attached dwelling, or a total of 12 in a multiple dwelling or an apartment building. Continuing to move north and down the street, at the bottom of the map on the east side is the MRRO zone. This is the former hospital site. MRRO stands for Mixed Residential, Retail, and Offices. It's approximately 430 feet in length along Witherspoon Street. There's one property, which was the Princeton Hospital. There is no parking on the west side. There is some parking on the east side. This zone permitted the hospital to remain. It also permits single-family, two-family, attached multiple dwellings. It limits apartment dwellings or multiple dwellings to 280 units. Non-residential uses are permitted, however, they're limited to 6% of the total area. The bulk standards for this include the former hospital site, so it has a lot area of about 5.6 acres, which is what's there. Front, rear, and side yard setbacks are 20 feet back from the right-of-way of the street. The FAR here is 1.8. It does permit buildings that could be 67.5 feet in height or 5 stories. Across the street, or you know what, let me stay on the east side. The bright orange, which is labeled RO, is the other component that was the former hospital. RO stands for Retail and Office District. It begins at the MRRO zone, which was the former borough line, and runs to Henry. It's about 150 feet in length. Again, there's one property. It contains 2 office buildings of approximately 60,000 square feet. The zone permits hospital offices, retail, banks, restaurants, personal services, and general office buildings, and both professional offices and doctors' offices. The lot area here is the existing lot. Again, the front setback is 25 feet. The rear is 0. It was crafted to allow the 2 buildings that are there to remain. And it's reddish on the wall map and kind of pinkish red. Above it is the B1 zone, which spans both sides of Witherspoon Street. Let's see if I can get that all on one screen. The B1 zone on the west side begins just past or just to the south of Lee Avenue and runs all the way down to just about Community Park School. On the east side, it's from Henry Avenue to just past Guillote. It stops at the firehouse. This area is approximately 1,300 feet in length. There are 10 lots in the B1 zone. Parking is limited to 2 hours on the east side near the northern end, no parking on the west side. Again, the lot sizes vary. Existing uses include single-family, 2-family homes, offices, the Packet buildings. There's a deli located across from the former hospital as well. The permitted uses in the B1 are retail, banks, offices, personal services, restaurants, and single-family homes. It does allow mixed-use buildings if the non-residential portion is limited to the ground floor area. Unlike the zone in the former borough, it does not set a percentage limit on the amount of non-residential space. The lot area for businesses is fairly small at 4,356 square feet. If there is to be a single-family home, it needs to be on a 10,890 square foot lot. Front setbacks for a business is 10 feet. For a residence, it's 25 feet. The rear and side yard setbacks are 15 feet. A business can have a 60% FAR, and a resident is limited to a 25% FAR. The permitted height in this zone is 30 feet. The township code doesn't provide for either limiting the number of stories or the coverage. They regulate the height or the number of stories through the height. The number of stories is regulated through a height to setback ratio, and the height, it doesn't list a specific number of stories as it was in the former borough code. The last zone in the corridor, shown up as a light tan, is the R6 zone. This basically runs from Community Park to Valley Road. It's 950 feet in length. There are approximately 4 properties. It's the school, the firehouse, the municipal offices, and the Board of Ed. There's no parking on the west side. Permitted uses in the R6 are single-family homes, and municipal and school uses are permitted as a conditional use in the zone as well. The bulk standards are a lot area 10,890 square feet. That translates to roughly 4 dwelling units an acre. Front setback at 25 feet, rear and side at 15. The FAR in this zone is 25%, so if you have a lot that complies with the 10,890 square foot area requirements, you could build a home up to 2,722 square feet. The height limit is 30 feet, and as I had indicated, there is no requirement or limitation on stories, although that roughly equates to a 2-story building. And lot coverage is allowed to be between 30 and 41%. We regulate impervious coverage in the township. There are no regulations for impervious coverage in the former borough code. That's a quick summary of about a mile in the town, as the mayor had indicated, and there's been no decisions. There's been a lot of discussion, I think, informally by people as to what can happen there. I know I ran through a lot of numbers. I have some charts. I can put those up with permitted uses and some of the bulk standards if you want to revisit some of those. But I think I'd like to stop there, take some questions from council, and then eventually open it to the public to see what people's concerns are, if any. I should point out that the zoning in the district has probably not changed in over 30 years. It may be as old as 40 or 50 years. But there's been very little change. There have been some new developments in the area over the last 10, 15 years. But with that, I think I'll take your questions, and then we'll go to the public.
Ms. Cornelia?
I know in some parts of town, the zoning is such that people are, buying small houses and then, as of right, building huge houses. How much potential is there right now based on what's there? Can you say kind of generally? Are the houses smaller than allowed, and the buildings?
It's hard to answer that because you have to look at what the lot size is, and at least in the township portion and in the borough portion. We regulate the house size by the FAR, floor area ratio, and that ratio is what's the lot size. And as I indicated, I can't give you a definitive answer. One of the charges you may want that may come out of this is that we look at some sort of what we call a capacity analysis and do just that, where we lay out either all of the properties or some sample properties. For residential, it's pretty simple. You just take the lot area and multiply it by the floor area ratio. You usually make an assumption that it's a two-story house, so you can fit it in and figure out what the size of the house is. For the non-residential portion, it gets a little trickier, primarily because you have to make certain that you can fit both the building and the parking and still meet all the setbacks on the lot. So that gets a little trickier as to what could go there. We didn't look at the capacity because I wasn't certain where we're going yet. And also I didn't know whether we're going to look at the entire corridor. As we went through it, and I think we went through it pretty quickly, the portion that's in the CB zone, the downtown, we may want to say that's really a downtown issue, and maybe we don't want to look at that. But I think those are things we need to talk about, and where are the concerns? Is it Witherspoon downtown, or is it really once you get to Paul Robeson and between Paul Robeson and Valley Road?
Well, I have a follow-up question that maybe relates to that. How does the density of that zoning compare with the rest of the town and the CBD? I assume that the CBD is the most densely...
It is. It has the higher FAR. The most dense is our R4 zone. That is not just the Witherspoon corridor. That in the R4 in the former borough, there's an R4 in the township, which is different. The R4 in the borough, which is in this area and other areas, allows for residential development a maximum of 14 dwelling units an acre if you're building townhouses or multifamily, or townhouses or apartment-type buildings. If you're doing single-family, it's about 7 units an acre, because again, the lot sizes vary or the requirements vary. So it's the more dense area, but again, the R4 covers a number of areas in town.
Well, except the MRR is right now the most dense. Is there any place else in town that's that dense?
No, but that was set because the hospital was there.
Are there questions on the side at this point? Oh, sorry, Ms. Howard.
I just have a quick comment, Lee, that it was a short memo, but I loved your overview memo because I thought you put it well when you said that, given that the zoning has been in place for over 30 years, but because we were two municipalities, there was never a chance to review it and come up with a unified vision. Now we have that opportunity. So I'm excited that we have so many people here from the community that we can hear from, and I know those of us who came here from serving previously on the Borough Council know that we've sometimes been in a pickle, was the fancy term I used, because of previous zoning and that we had not been updating it and we were not ready for developments that were coming our way. And so it's nice to be able to take a breath and do that. And but I hope you don't take a breath, because I think we want to move relatively quickly, right, is my sense.
Well, I think that's something we have to define. I know it was a priority of council in your goal setting to take a look at it. For a small area, there are a lot of zones. We now have that opportunity if we wanted to look at the RB and the B1 and say maybe they should be combined in some way. We have a solid residential component to it. We may want to look at protecting that. But again, I think we're open for that discussion, but you're correct in that while we had one planning board and they looked at things holistically, when it came to the zoning, each governing body was very protective of the zone, and we were never able really to get all the players at the table and say, what is it we really want to do? And I think we have that opportunity now.
Well, and my guess, Heather, is that it seems like we want that capacity analysis, doesn't it? I mean, I want to hear from the community, but what you're saying is we want to find out if building that we don't like could be.
That's right. We want to be, exactly. We need your help predicting some of the trends and hearing from the community what they like that we want to protect, I think, right? So.
Right. I think that's one of the steps. I mean, another step is a visioning process. Rather than just looking at what does the zone allow, is to hear from people, what do we want it to be? It may be that what we really need are good design standards as opposed to a new zoning. But we'll hear.
Mr. Simon?
Thank you, Mr. Solo. Are there any, having gone through the zoning, are there any aspects of the master plan or the most recently submitted affordable housing plan that would supplement what you've described by covering the zoning?
I'm not certain, Pat, I understand when you say supplement.
Is there anything else that we should be aware of as we're considering the zoning and the planning of this region beyond the description of the zoning? So, for example, if I'm not mistaken, at least one of the areas here is in one of our affordable housing plans submitted to COA.
Correct. That's what I was going to say. The R4A is in the former borough's COA plan. It wasn't very well defined other than just the 20% set aside. And in fact, that's partly why we rezoned it with the A, is so that it would go to, I forget they call it prospective, the new need, as opposed to under some of the code requirements under COA, is it goes to a prior need. And by rezoning it, we saw the opportunity to allow for a co-accrediting for the future need. Don't forget, in the former borough code, any development with 5 units or more had to provide 20% set aside. So this doesn't really add a new burden that you wouldn't find in the R4 district. But when that regulation is used, it goes to previous need under the COA regulations. So we wanted it to count for any future need. That's probably a little confusing. We probably need really
I think that's probably a different discussion also.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, I see Mark Frieda in the audience, and so when you talk about things that we might need to consider, I think if we look at the PFARS building being at the, if we're moving ahead, and that will create a different traffic pattern, and what implications that might have for how we want to look at what happens on Witherspoon, right?
I think so, and Joe, you raise an excellent point. I've really focused on zoning and a little bit on the land uses. There's a whole other component which we may want to look at, which is circulation. There's a lot happening on Witherspoon. I mean, I was talking just about parking. It has sidewalks, some of which are in good shape, some of which are poor shape. On both sides, there are some grade challenges where the sidewalks aren't so great. There's a whole streetscape and street trees that we want to deal with. Bicycles are a concern. It's heavily utilized by both cars, bicycles, and pedestrians. And what we can do, to look at all modes, we may want to include the roadway itself with our complete street policy.
I think, one of my frustrations when applications come for change in zoning or we don't seem to have a list of things or a design in mind that we consistently ask for from developers. So you mentioned that some of the sidewalks are not in good shape, some of our infrastructure, you know, whether we have bike paths or whatnot, but we don't even have really a kind of unified look, I think, that we're trying to achieve. It seems sometimes, and we just kind of ask rather haphazardly for things.
I think you're right, and this corridor probably really shows that the most. It's less than a mile. You got 8 very different zones, 2 towns that divided it, and they each had slightly different visions, I think, as to what should happen here. So I think it was Heather said, we really have an opportunity here now to look at the entire code and say, is there a vision, or is there something we want as a community for this corridor?
Yeah, Mr. Simon.
So following up on that question, you mentioned very briefly the term form-based code or form-based zoning. Could you just describe that and how that would be different from the zoning we have now?
Typically, form-based code doesn't really look so much at the uses as it looks at the form of the buildings. So it focuses much more on the building's relationship to what it would call the public realm or the street. So where I was talking about different setbacks, form-based code would look at that as well. It would look at the separation between the buildings. It would look at doing things like, okay, maybe if you're having retail, you want that close, but the apartment above needs to be pushed back. So it's very much trying to create a desirable visual streetscape, which is a little different than, as you heard me go through the regular zoning. It's a 15-foot setback, it's a 20-foot side, whatever it may be. Form looks more at the form of the building.
Lee, if you look, excuse me, if you
Yeah, Ms.
look at,
Cutler, and then I'd like to open it up to the public.
if you look at form, does that preclude you from looking at use as well? So you wouldn't have a dry cleaner right next door to a residential, even though the form may?
That's a little tougher. I mean, you can look at some of the uses, but typically it's hard to say you don't want a dry cleaner next to a residence, because usually you're permitting a series of residences. But that's something we could look at. I haven't seen zoning that specifically does that. Typically, when you do that, that's where a conditional use might come in, and you say, you know, dry cleaner is a conditional use, and then the standard would be, but it has to be 150 feet from a residence type thing. So there are tools that, if those are issues we need to look at, we can address.
Mr. Schauer.
I'm sorry, this will be my last question. In many of the discussions we've had before the planning board or the zoning board, the question comes up, well, but how much is this going to impact the taxpayer in terms of cost when you consider infrastructure, when you consider children going to schools, et cetera? And the answer that inevitably comes back to people is, we can't talk about that now. We can only talk about whether it conforms with zoning. So the question, we are now talking about reshaping the zoning. Do we have as part of the toolkit already, or is that something we would need to investigate, doing that kind of analysis to understand the impact that the zoning could have on the town, and just in terms of the costs?
We can. I mean, if we're looking at changing it, or if we're worried about or concerned that the existing zoning may allow more than what we think, I think first step then would be some sort of capacity analysis to see whether or not what's in the ground is all that's permitted, or if we would, you know, double or triple, and I don't think it's anywhere as near that, the size, and then take a look at those implications. It gets a little tricky in the mixed-use zones, because you don't know whether there are going to be apartments above, how big they're going to be, is the retail going to be bigger, the business zone, you know, you don't know whether it's going to be a single the B1 in the former township, whether it's going to be a single family home, which has a different implication than if it's an office building in terms of costs to the community.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'd like to open it up to the public now, and I just encourage everybody to come up and form a line at the mic. And there are a lot of people here who probably want to speak, so I would just please be courteous to your fellow residents who want to have a chance to talk. And like I said, when I introduced this will probably not be our last discussion on this as well.
Hi,
Yeah, go
good
ahead.
evening. Linda Auerbach, Lido Street. I just have a quick question, no comments or anything. You mentioned the area, I forget what its designation is, between Paul Robeson Place and Quarry Street as being dedicated to religious and I believe you said nonprofit and residential.
The area between
Paul Robeson Place and Quarry Street.
I think what I said is that's an R4 zone.
Okay.
And it permits single-family homes, both places of worship and educational and philanthropic. Thank you. Uses or conditional uses in the zone.
Are you aware that there's a business located at 114 Witherspoon which is called Pelusa? It operates as a travel agency, money orders, money transfers at
Yes.
114. So is that...
It is not permitted. It's what we would call a pre-existing non-conforming use, because that use, well, not that particular use, but a non-residential use has been there for many years.
Right. My concern is, can that be used as a precedent for some other business under to try to set up shop? Thank you.
Okay. I don't want an answer.
Hi, Daniel Harris again. I really have a question. In the age of internet technology and information sciences, I'm wondering, Mr. Solo, whether it would be possible for your office to send your excellent and very clear presentation to all of us in the former borough and the former township, now consolidated, by means whatever. I can think of 20 people offhand, 25 of whom are in this room right now, who would like to see this presentation straight up. And if there was a way of presenting by slide or other means the description of each zone, those of us who sometimes think of us as activists in the community would have a better chance of getting at this information than by going to municipal offices upstairs and running through those elephant sheets, which are so well thumbed as to be almost falling
It's already up on the website.
On the web.
So if you go
It's on the website?
if you go to the agenda for tonight's meeting,
I didn't
and
realize that. I do apologize. I mean,
it's
whole of
under
this
the presentation. You just click on it, and all the maps are
And I have
there.
one more question. This shows a horizontal strip. Does the zoning, as you have described it, also give, as it, the north, I won't say, the top and the bottom limits of each zone also? Do you understand what I mean? I can't do east and west, you know, it's much too difficult, but...
Well, all this really shows are properties that front on Witherspoon Street. The intent was not to go beyond that. If it's identified that, you know, maybe that's what we need to do, we can, but for tonight's discussion, it was just identifying properties that front on Witherspoon.
I see. So there remains an outstanding question about whether the frontages on Witherspoon Street constitute the whole or only a part of the neighborhoods to which those buildings are attached. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you, sir.
Well, just to say it differently, there's no question, but he's only covered the part on Witherspoon Street.
That's right. But the parts on Witherspoon are de facto connected with whole neighborhoods, and that is not entirely represented.
That's right.
Thank you.
Actually, Mr. Solo, could you answer Ms. Auerbach's question from previously? She asked whether the existence of one business in a non-conforming use, pre-existing non-conforming use, could serve as a precedent for a new non-conforming use to come in.
It is not a precedent. However, somebody coming to the zoning board saying, I want a use variance to have another non-residential use, and they will cite that the property next door is non-residential. But again, the board has to evaluate, or in that case, the zoning board would have to evaluate the criteria, the positive and negative criteria, and certain special reasons for that. But it doesn't set a precedent, but it does provide any applicant with some ammunition to say there's one there. The answer on the flip side is simply that this is a residential zone and it's not permitted, so that anybody proposing it has a heavy burden, but they will cite and say, well, next door is a non-residential. What may come out of this, and I think that's part of the discussion we need to hear, if we want to take steps to further protect the R4 designation and the Witherspoon Corridor, those residences, we can do that mostly by having some discussion in the master plan about the Witherspoon Corridor and the desire to protect that, so that that information is available, and when an applicant comes in, myself or Derek Bridger, who's here, our zoning officer, can advise the zoning board that there's a comment, not unlike the, I don't know what the planning board will do, but the resolution you sent them on front yard parking. So there are opportunities to, either through zoning or the master plan and how they relate, to come up with something to protect the community.
Thank you.
Ms. Neumann?
Ann Lyman, Alexander Street in Princeton. I have a couple of general comments about reconsidering zoning, but let me start with something specific about the John Witherspoon neighborhood. I think it's an excellent place to consider form-based zoning. For example, on Quarry Street, there are 3 modern houses now, 2 of which are attached. The 2 that are attached have no porch. The one that is freestanding has a porch, but is, I think most of us would agree, out of keeping with the character of the neighborhood. An appropriate form-based zoning for that particular part of the John Witherspoon neighborhood might require a porch. You might want to say that a new house in this neighborhood needs a porch, but then you'd have to look at the modern house that has a porch in order to see what you needed to add to form-based zoning if you wanted to eliminate that kind of house. But the general comment that I want to make is that other towns burden the developer, anybody who wants to come and develop in this neighborhood, and if one of the objectives, which as I think it should be, is to control the costs for the town, in other words, not to assume that every new development brings rateables in excess of the cost that it would also bring, I think that's better done outside of looking at the Witherspoon Street neighborhood. I think it's probably something that you should do with the cooperation of the planning board, that it ought to be added to the master plan, that developers are required to, developers in excess of a certain number of units should do not only an environmental analysis and a traffic analysis, but also a cost-benefit analysis at their own expense. In other words, they would pay a consultant to be chosen by you to carry out the analysis. So it would be paid for by the developer, but the consultant would be chosen by council. And I think, as I say, that's better done now to apply to the town as a whole. And there are lots and lots of other towns that have successful zoning policies regarding businesses and residential areas. And those of you who are on the executive board of our Princeton's Democratic Club will know that I'm the chair of a new local issues committee, which is going to be set up to do research on exactly this kind of zoning question. And if anybody in the audience would like to help research that kind of thing and present it to council, please let me know after the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Jim Floyd, 64 Harris Road. I've listened attentively to Mr. Solo's presentation, and I dare say there's not a street in Princeton that compares to the either spot zoning or arbitrary establishment of that which shouldn't be there. The history of Witherspoon Street, as many of you know, was historically a street that was residential, occupied by African American citizens in this community. With the advent of segregation, there was an allowance for businesses on Witherspoon Street to service the residents who were not allowed to go uptown, as we called it then, Nassau Street, etc., to make a purchase. In fact, historically, it was pejorative, but Witherspoon Street was known as African Alley, for obvious reasons. Witherspoon Street was also, as many of you historians know, the escape route from Princeton, from Nassau Hall. It's parallel 206, with the exception of John, which doesn't run all the way through. The presentation tonight by Mr. Solo, he inherited that, but it is, in my opinion, another indication of the creeping exodus of our African American community. At one time, there was a Jackson Street. There's no longer a Jackson Street. The realignment of Jackson Street, those of you who are trigonometrically inclined will note that it's kind of an OG curve as you get to that point where the new upscale apartments are. It bends towards the Baptist church. There is no side yard to the Baptist church. What was most vulnerable was the Baptist church. I ask you, as you look at Witherspoon Street, please look at it from the standpoint of citizens who have contributed to our community. I ask you to consider it from the standpoint of the ordinance requirements and such things as circulation and others that affect not only Witherspoon Street, but the rest of those of you who come to Witherspoon Street occasionally. Please don't make a hasty decision. Please consider residential requirements that may help to retain some of our citizens who've served us well and for lack of a residence have moved on. I ask you not to make a hasty decision. I ask you to consider the history. I urge you to consider more residential zoning than the commercial. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alexi Asmus, Maple Street. I'd like to ask that the municipality engages a consultant urban designer to help the community envision our human-built environment. I think we need a professional and we need somebody with architectural training. It is a complicated street, and I ask that. I know there's several architects in town who have asked for that, and perhaps I can get together with them and we can approach some of you about this. I think it's very important that we have a professional urban designer look at this. I'd also like to echo what Pat Simon said, and I would ask that municipal council does a fiscal impact analysis. I know that Lee Solo said it's complicated given that different amounts of apartments can be built, but I wonder if something simple like how much does it cost to add a one-bedroom apartment to town? How much does it cost to add a two-bedroom? How much does it cost to add a single-family home? My understanding is that it's pretty common knowledge that at this point, increases in residential units mean increases in taxes for residents. So I'm asking that. I'd also, it's before you rezone that you're allowed to look at these questions, not after. I'd like you to look at the school situation. The high school is overcrowded. I just read the report done by the demographer for the BOE. The high school is going to grow by a couple hundred students. The middle school is going to grow. And I'd like a plan in place for how that's going to be dealt with. My son is in a math class with 30 kids now, and I'd like a plan going forward before we see rezoning. A traffic study for Witherspoon Street. I know there's going to be probably an increase in traffic, at least in the morning rush hour, and I'd like the municipality to conduct a traffic study rather than depend on developers' traffic study. And finally, there are some old sewers in this area. The Henry Avenue sewers have overflown several times. People are living with check valves in their houses. And I know that Park Place just had their sewers replaced. So I think in these neighborhoods, they're old sewers, and that needs to be considered, and that should be considered before any rezoning to higher density. My last question really is to you. Lee Solo mentioned perhaps instead of rezoning, we need to look at design standards. Well, in the near recent past, the municipality chose not to defend its site plan ordinance where the design standards sit. So I want to ask you, if you decide to take that route and try to re-envision the Witherspoon corridor using a site plan ordinance where design standards sit, are you going to defend that in court? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Kate Warren, Jefferson Road, Shop McCaffrey's, outstanding gesture in support of our volunteer firemen and first aid squad. I'm going to shorten my comments, given this is just the first of several meetings, but I wanted to suggest that the zoning be looked at with an eye toward reducing the allowable density to preserve what remains of the character of the Witherspoon Street corridor, which is most affected by increased density. And it's another reason to support Alexi's request that we hire a consultant of an urban designer in the process. Secondly, when Councilwoman Crumiller asked the question about buying a property, raising it, and erecting a larger home on that, what's missing, I think, is that a developer could buy one or two adjoining lots. And so I think that there has to be some language that would limit the square footage at the point if someone is seeking to buy two adjacent lots, create one housing unit, the limitation for square footage should be reduced in some way. Also, when we talk about this process and what is the vision, in my mind, that calls into immediate urgency that the planning board also be looking at the housing element in the master plan at the same time. And I think I'll leave that for this evening, and thank you all very much.
I just want to mention before the next speakers that we did invite the planning board here tonight, and I wasn't able to introduce everybody, but there's many members of the planning board here because we wanted them to be a part of this discussion as well.
I'm Debbie Hollander. I'm in 43 Humbert Street, which is right off the cemetery that's depicted on the map. I would like to second the point that the traffic that's been generated by a couple recent developments in town has suddenly made that has made Wiggin Street and Witherspoon Street has created a traffic jam for including the parking garage. So it's now what used to be an easy route in and out of town has already become, waiting for a break in the traffic. And that should be a concern going forward because we're not going to be expanding the width of any of these streets. We're probably not going to be cutting the parking on any of these streets because there's a shortage of parking in town, which is very important for our economic thing, which means when we increase density in any way whatsoever, we are going to be increasing the number of cars. I know everybody hopes that somehow or other we'll end up with people who live on one part of town and will walk to another part of town for work. That probably doesn't happen all that much. Despite our intentions, we live in suburbia, people get a job, and then they end up having to move to change a different job, or they end up needing to drive out of town for items, and we have to be realistic about that. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that weren't said explicitly in the presentation, but we need to consider. One is that there are a couple of things on Witherspoon Street that I don't expect will change. There's the public library is on the corner of Witherspoon and Wiggins. That's an important community facility. People do drive to go there in the evening, but more importantly, a lot of people walk to there, and that's also an important facility for students in the town. This building is probably not going to change, which is a facility for the town. I assume the community park school is not going to change, and that's our youngest students. And there are parents who drop people off by cars, and there are also kids who cross the street to get there. In addition, the cemetery is not going to change. That cemetery, it actually is where John Witherspoon is, and Grover Cleveland, and the woman who published Ulysses. So that's a fairly important cultural resource for the town. As well, it's also an operating cemetery. Occasionally there are funerals there. And any vision going forward is going to have to include that there's some things there that are very unlikely to change. And so, for instance, we're not likely to have a shiny, modern shopping mall type street because it's going to be, those uses are fixed. In addition, it's probably never going to be completely a quiet, sleepy neighborhood because of the new development where the hospital used to be, and because of things like this building, which are places where there's always going to be activities and traffic. And I think we have to be realistic about what's here as well as we talk about what's going forward.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jim Kilgore. I'm president of the Packet and live at 492 Pretty Brook Road. We didn't get an invitation here, but of course I read my paper. But anyway, I think this is great that you're having this discussion. I do want to mention that back in the late 80s, and there was some discussion after, there was an attempt to change the B1 zone, and there was discussion by the owners there, and we were able to prevail to keep the zoning the way it was. And certainly I think it's great to have a discussion, but I think the businesses there feel the zone is working. They want to be good neighbors, but there was a proposal to make the zone residential second floor. And most of those buildings there have offices on the second floor. Some are residential. It's a mix. The use is, I think, has worked reasonably well. You're going to have more residents at the former hospital site. You'll need services, local services for those folks. And in talking to my fellow B1 folks, feel very good about the zone, and we think that there's any proposal to change that, we really should sit down and talk about it. But we are very supportive of the existing zone as it is, and we think it serves the town well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just get a show of hands to people who haven't spoken yet who want to this evening? Okay.
I was going to shorten my remarks, thinking there were so many, but maybe I'll just go on and on. Beverly Leach, 293 Witherspoon Street. I was going to talk mainly about my vision for the Witherspoon corridor. We live at the lower end, across roughly from the Packet and Community Park School. We've lived there for 2 years, having been in Princeton elsewhere in Princeton for about 30 years, and we downsized and converted a two-family rental property that we own to a residence for ourselves. And we have sat on the porch and watched Lance go jogging by, and couples going to Conti's for pizza, and everybody walking their dogs, and we've enjoyed conversations about, oh, what kind of flower is that, and the garden is looking good, and oh, the dog is growing. And we have never enjoyed village living in our 30 years in Princeton the way we have in the last 2. Obviously, there's a long way to go for Witherspoon Street, but I have a sense of, from our brief experience on the porch at dinner time, what this village corridor could be like 10 times more, 100 times more with the right planning. I think one of the keys is balance. And we already have residentially a very dense area coming with Avalon Bay and a tall area coming. And I think the residential planning, I love this form-based idea. I think it needs to be on the side of balancing that with single-family, two-family, smaller apartment dwellings limited to 4 units or something like that, I don't know. And I think in the commercial area, again, we need to balance that with the larger buildings in the area. We already have printing plant and a professional office building, and instead maybe going smaller and in favor of local businesses, if preferably smaller businesses, would give us a sense of balance and create a nice, walkable, pleasant experience for people. But I mainly want to, I think, finally make a comment about my belief in flower power. I love the idea of bringing in a consultant with urban design experience, but I hope that will include enough attention to the streetscaping. I expect it would. And we can do general plantings here and there. We could also add color. We wouldn't need to do anything as seasonally ambitious as the hanging planters up in Nassau Street and around Palmer Square, or the holiday decorations there. We certainly could, but we wouldn't need to. I think what we do need is a very unified kind of gardenscaping along the street. We have pretty consistent frontage distances there, and I would urge you to give serious thought to that. I think that could lend a unified impression, even though we might have more residences in one area, more commercial in another, make it pleasant to walk along, create a whole image that's what we're trying to achieve. And it may also inspire those who live and work along the corridor to improve their own properties in the same vein. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Brent Ferguson, Witherspoon Street. About 8 years ago, I tried in my non-conforming lot to get a zoning ordinance to simply improve my lot, improve my residence in my home. And it took a lot of work and a lot of difficulty and time and effort and money just to get the permissions to then spend the money and spend the time to plan. And I guess I don't know how many lots in that area B1 in which my house resides are actually conforming lots. There isn't 15 feet of setback on one side and the other because the whole lot is only 30 feet wide. So unless you're going to build on a point which doesn't have a dimension, then you can't build anything. So I guess if we ever were to consider rezoning, consider the proportion of lots that might be non-conforming lots and try to make them all conform to whatever you call normal at that new point. I'm not a professional in any of this. I'm just a property owner. But that's really all I wanted to say, was consider what constitutes a normal or conforming or non-conforming lot if that gets redone. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a good point, and I think that'd be interesting to, in addition to the capacity study, get a sense of how many non-conforming lots there are, especially if there's a lot in each zone.
Hi there, Wendy Ludlam, 229 South Harrison Street. And I just wanted to, I guess it's funny that the last person just said, I'm just a property owner. Because I want to say, no, you're part of the community, you're a resident. And so before this meeting, I was walking my dog along, parked in the municipal parking lot. Walked my dog, we walked around Birch Street, these streets around here. I mean, the neighborhoods are, the streets of this area are so lovely, and there's such personality. And I was talking to one gentleman who, I asked if he was coming tonight, and he's like, oh, this has been going on for 2 years, and I just can't even, cope with it. It's, nothing will change, nothing will be done, and he grew up here, and so I just want to invite everyone to, take some time during the day, or come early or come late or on the weekend, and just get a feeling for this community, which is really, really what we're talking about, trying not to lose community in every level of the meaning, from the heart community, from the neighbor community, from one neighborhood to another community, to our relationship with Trenton community. I mean, I think we need to talk about, the vision isn't that we should re-envision